The year is 218 AD, and the flickering light of oil lamps casts long, dancing shadows against the marble walls of the Palatinate, betraying the trembling hands of Rome's most powerful men. In the suffocating heat of the Imperial dining hall, a silence hangs heavy and thick, punctuated only by the nervous clinking of silverware and the rhythmic thrum of foreign drums that sound nothing like the disciplined marches of the legions. A woman, draped in the finest silks that trade routes could provide, sits frozen in her chair, her eyes fixed on the tabletop, terrified to look up, terrified to breathe, terrified that the boy king lounging on the couch at the head of the room might notice her existence. This was supposed to be a celebration of the empire's continuity, a banquet to honor the Senate and the glory of the state. But every guest present knew the truth that curled like smoke around the pillars. They were not guests. They were hostages in a theater of cruelty, and the host was not a man of Roman virtue, but a teenager who viewed the dignity of the aristocracy as a toy to be broken for amusement. The emperor, known to history as Elagabalus, watched them with eyes that had seen the ecstatic rituals of the Syrian deserts, and in his gaze, there was no recognition of Roman law, only the volatile whim of a living god who found the fierce senators to be the sweetest wine. He stood up, the movement causing a ripple of panic to surge through the room, and walked slowly among the reclining diners, his fingers tracing the edges of goblets and the shoulders of wives who belonged to men old enough to be his grandfather. He stopped behind a high-ranking matron, the wife of a consul, and the room seemed to hold his collective breath, waiting for the punchline of a joke that would ruin a family's reputation for generations. The emperor spoke a single command, and the humiliation began, a precise and surgical dismantling of status that turned the highest nobility of the Roman Empire into trembling subjects stripped of their pride. This moment, frozen in the terror of a banquet that would never be forgotten by those who survived it, encapsulates the terrifying question that haunted the ancient world. What happens when absolute power falls into the hands of someone who believes that human dignity is nothing more than a barrier to their own pleasure? If you are fascinated by the darker corridors of ancient history and the psychology of tyranny, make sure to engage with this content as we delve into the reign that nearly broke the moral spine of Rome. The boy at the center of this nightmare was not merely a bad ruler. He was a traumatic event in the psyche of the West, a figure who challenged every norm of gender, religion, and governance, leaving behind a legacy written in the blood of the aristocracy and the scandalous whispers of the Roman streets. To understand how a teenage priest from the East came to hold the throne of the world's greatest superpower, we must look away from the banquet hall and travel back to the sun-drenched edges of the empire, to the province of Syria, where the seeds of this madness were first sown. The story does not begin in the Forum, but in the city of Emesa, a place where the cultural gravity of Rome began to fade into the mysticism of the Near East, and where the sun was not just a celestial body, but a deity to be fed with incense and dance. Born Varius Avitus Bassianus, the boy who would become Elagabalus was never groomed for the stoic duties of a Roman statesman. Instead, he was raised in the shadow of the Black Stone, a meteorite said to have fallen from the heavens, which served as the physical manifestation of the sun god Elagabal. His family held the hereditary priesthood of this deity, a position of immense local prestige that required elaborate rituals, distinct clothing, and a worldview that saw the divine as something immediate, passionate, and overwhelming. The young Bassianus learned early on that spectacle was power, that the swirling of robes and the beating of drums could induce a trance in the faithful, a lesson he would disastrously apply to the cynical politics of the capital. He was part of the Severan dynasty through his grandmother, Julia Maesa, a woman of formidable intelligence and ruthless political instinct who watched from the sidelines as the imperial line crumbled. When the Emperor Caracalla was assassinated and replaced by the usurper Macrinus in 217 AD, the Severan women found themselves exiled and sidelined, trapped in their ancestral home of Emesa, while a bureaucratic soldier sat on the throne. But Julia Maesa was not a woman to accept irrelevance, and she looked at her teenage grandson with his striking looks and his sacerdotal charisma and saw not a priest, but a weapon. She began to weave a narrative that was as dangerous as it was brilliant, spreading the rumor among the restless legion stationed nearby that Bassianus was not merely a cousin of the late emperor, but the illegitimate son of Caracalla himself, a claim that carried the potent weight of blood right. Money flowed from the temple treasury into the pockets of the soldiers, purchasing loyalty with gold and promises, until the 3rd Gallica Legion, tired of the strict discipline of Macrinus, and enticed by the wealth of the Syrian princesses, declared the 14-year-old boy to be Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, the rightful emperor of Rome. The resulting civil war was brief and brutal, culminating in the Battle of Antioch with a pampered priest, finding himself amidst the chaos of combat, reportedly charged the enemy lines with a desperation that rallied his troops, leading to the collapse of Macrinus' regime and the opening of the road to Rome. When Elagabalus arrived in the Eternal City in 219 AD, he did not come as a conquering Roman general in a toga, but as a triumphant high priest of the sun, bringing with him an entourage of Syrian mystics, exotic animals, and the sacred black stone itself. The Roman Senate, a body deeply entrenched in tradition and conservative values, watched in horror as their new master entered the city wearing silks and tiaras, his face painted with cosmetics, dancing to the music of cymbals in a display that shattered every expectation of imperial gravitas. He was not interested in the dusty administrative duties of state. His mission was theological revolution, the installation of Elagabalus as the supreme deity of the Roman pantheon, displacing Jupiter Optimus Maximus from his celestial throne. This was not merely a change in worship. It was a fundamental assault on the Roman identity, a declaration that the old gods, the very patrons of Rome's military success, were now subordinate to a foreign meteorite from a mesa. He constructed a massive temple complex, the Elagabalus on the Palatine Hill, the sacred heart of the city, and forced the senators to participate in rituals that they found baffling and degrading, involving strange sacrifices and the worship of the stone. The historian Cassius Dio, a contemporary who sat in the Senate and witnessed these events with seething resentment, describes a ruler who seemed determined to invert every norm of society, treating the solemn traditions of the ancestors as mere obstacles to his religious fervor. But if the religious heresies were offensive, it was the emperor's conduct within the palace that truly terrified the elite, for Elagabalus turned the imperial household into a laboratory of transgression where the boundaries of gender, sexuality, and propriety were aggressively dissolved. The banquet halls became the stage for his most psychological tortures, where he would force distinguished men to drink until they were sick, or mix commoners with nobility in seating arrangements that mocked the rigid social hierarchy of the empire. He was known to unleash tame leopards and lions into the dining room after the guests had passed out from intoxication, waking them in a panic as they believed they were about to be devoured, laughing at their terror from the safety of a balcony. The sexual scandals that swirled around Elagabalus were weaponized by his enemies, but they point to a genuine and radical rejection of Roman masculinity that deeply unsettled the patriarchal foundations of the state. He reportedly saw physicians who could perform a sex change operation, a concept centuries ahead of his time, and preferred to be addressed as a lady rather than a lord, often appearing in public in female attire and working with wool like a traditional matron. He entered into a series of shocking marriages, the most blasphemous of which was to Aquilia Severa, a Vestal virgin sworn to absolute chastity under penalty of being buried alive. By taking a Vestal as his bride, Elagabalus was not just breaking a law. He was committing a spiritual crime that many Romans believed would have been a wrath of the gods down upon the city, yet he justified it as a sacred marriage between the high priest of the sun and the high priestess of the hearth, a union intended to produce godlike children. This union sent shockwaves through the populace, for the Vestals were the guardians of the sacred fire that ensured Rome's survival, and to defile one was to endanger the very existence of the empire. Alongside these high-profile unions, the emperor surrounded himself with charioteers, athletes, and actors, promoting men of low birth to powerful positions based on his personal attraction to them, a practice that infuriated the senators who saw their own influence waning in favor of the emperor's favorites. The figure of Hierocles, a blonde slave and charioteer, rose to such prominence that Elagabalus reportedly considered declaring him Caesar, a move that would have placed a former slave in line for the throne, an ultimate insult to the grandees of Rome. The Historia Augusta, a collection of biographies that is often sensational but likely reflects the hostile atmosphere of the time, paint a picture of a ruler who was completely detached from the reality of governance, obsessed only with the pursuit of sensation and the elevation of his oriental cult. Yet, beneath the layers of exaggeration and moral outrage in the sources, we can discern a young man who was thrust into a position of absolute authority, without any preparation, tried to impose the only worldview he knew, that of the Syrian high priest, onto a rigid and xenophobic culture that hated him for it. The grandmother, Julia Misa, who had orchestrated his rise, watched with growing alarm as her grandson alienated every power base in the city, realizing that his behavior was not just eccentric, but suicidal for the dynasty she had worked so hard to restore. She understood that the patience of Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers who protected the emperor, was finite, and that their loyalty was based on gold and respect, both of which Elagabalus was squandering. The soldiers, who had once hailed him as a son of Caracalla, now looked at the painted, dancing figure in the palace with contempt, grumbling that he was unfit to lead men of war, and that his foreign god was a stain on the honor of the legions. Misa, a pragmatist at her core, began to maneuver once again, seeing that if she did not act, the inevitable assassination of Elagabalus would likely take the entire family down with him. She persuaded the emperor to adopt his cousin, Alexianus, a mild-mannered and traditional boy who was being raised to respect Roman customs, arguing that this would allow Elagabalus to focus entirely on his religious duties, while his cousin handled the boring affairs of state. Elagabalus agreed, renaming the boy Severus Alexander, but he soon realized that the Senate and the army adored the cousin, and despised him, sparking a jealous rage that would lead to his undoing. He attempted to have Alexander assassinated, spreading rumors of his death to gauge the reaction of the guard, but when the soldiers riotously demanded to see Alexander alive, Elagabalus realized his miscalculation. On March 11th, 222 AD, the tension finally snapped when Elagabalus visited the Praetorian camp with Alexander and ordered the punishment of soldiers who had cheered for his cousin. The guard, fed up with the whims of the priest-king, turned on him in a sudden explosion of violence, cutting down the 18-year-old emperor and his mother, Julius Aemias, who had clung to him until the end. The fury of the soldiers was so great that they did not just kill him, they sought to obliterate his memory, dragging his headless corpse through the streets of Rome like the carcass of a dead animal, subjecting it to every indignity before throwing it into the sewage-filled waters of the Tiber River. The assassination of Elagabalus was followed by a comprehensive damnatio memoriae, a decree that his name should be erased from public records, his statues toppled, and his reign regarded as a temporary insanity that had gripped the empire. The Black Stone was unceremoniously sent back to Emesa, the Elagabalium was rededicated to Jupiter, and the new regime of Severus Alexander worked tirelessly to portray the previous 4 years as a bad dream from which Rome had finally awakened. However, the scars left by Elagabalus ran deeper than chipped inscriptions. His reign had exposed the fragility of the imperial system, demonstrating that a single erratic individual could hold the entire state hostage to his personal fantasies. The banquets where senators had trembled were not just parties gone wrong. They were displays of the raw, unbridled power that the Principate placed in the hands of one man, revealing that the safety of the elite depended entirely on the self-restraint of the emperor, a restraint that Elagabalus completely lacked. For the women of the nobility who had been treated as props, and the men who had been forced to applaud their own degradation, the trauma was a silent wound that festered long after the Tiber had washed away the emperor's body. The historical accounts, written by men like Cassius Dio and later the authors of the Historia Augusta, are dripping with vitriol and likely exaggerate the extent of the depravity. Yet they agree on the fundamental atmosphere of fear and unpredictability that permeated the court. This was a time when the logic of the sanctuary and the logic of the barracks collided, when the mysticism of the East tried to overwrite the pragmatism of the West, resulting in a cultural convulsion that nearly tore the Severan dynasty apart. The story of Elagabalus is often retold as a catalog of sins, a list of shocking anecdotes about smothered guests and sacrilegious marriages, but it is ultimately a tragedy of a boy who was used as a pawn by his family, elevated to a godhood he didn't understand, and destroyed by a city that could not accept him. In the end, the reign of Elagabalus serves as a dark mirror to the glory of Rome, reflecting the grotesque distortions that occur when absolute power is divorced from responsibility and tradition. The golden age of the Antonines was long gone, and in its place was the crisis of the 3rd century waiting in the wings, a period of chaos that Elagabalus seemed to prefigure with his disregard for the stability of the state. The banquet tables where he played with the lives of senators were the testing grounds for a new kind of tyranny, one that did not rely on the cold application of law, but on the theatrical, unpredictable, and humiliating exercise of dominance. History records the sensation, the scandal, and the blood, but often forgets the human cost of those 4 years, the terror of the guests who sat rigid while music thudded like a heartbeat, praying that the emperor's gaze would not fall upon them. The empire would survive, trudging onward through centuries of decline and transformation. But the memory of the priest king who danced in silk will remain a cautionary tale, a vivid reminder that the distance between civilization and madness is often measured only by the sanity of the man wearing the purple. As the waters of the Tiber closed over the mutilated body of the last Antonine to spark such fury, Rome turned its back on the sun god and returned to the grim business of survival, leaving the story of Varius Vitus Bassianus to become a legend of excess that still fascinates and horrifies the world today. If you found this deep dive into the abyss of Roman history compelling, please consider supporting the channel for more unvarnished accounts of the past. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on whether Elagabalus was a tyrant or a victim of his own circumstances, and tell us which era of history you want us to illuminate next. The shadows of the past are long, and there are always more stories waiting to be uncovered in the dark.